Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mrs. G's Storytime. We are reading Star of Light by Patricia St. John with permission of Moody Publishing Company, and we are reading Chapter 16, Rescue Plans. Rosemary spent most of the next day trying to trace Haman, but Haman was apparently determined not to be traced. Why should an English nurse want him urgently just now? Perhaps his stepfather had spoken to her and she was going to hand him over. It was all most suspicious, and Haman decided to keep clear of her. However, the English nurse was so determined to find him that on being told that Haman had gone up into the mountain early, she canceled the boys' meeting and settled herself just before sunset behind the pillar of the great stone archway through which he was likely to return. Before long, a weary little figure sulked in through the shadows, and she grabbed hold of what remained of his shirt. For a moment he struggled violently, but she spoke to him at once, and her words stopped him immediately, and he stood still. "Haman," she said pleadingly, "I've lost Kinza. Can you help me find her again? Do you know where she might have gone?" She kept tight hold of him, and he stood rigidly in front of her, gazing at her uncertainly. At first he was too startled to think, and gradually his mind cleared, and he began to put two and two together. If Kinza had disappeared, her stepfather had certainly taken her home, and if the nurse was searching for her, then she did not know about their stepfather. But it did seem safe to tell. It might lead to contact with the police, and no little street boy ever wishes to have anything to do with the police. Or it might lead to meeting his family, or it might be a trick or a trap. It was far safer to deny everything and have nothing to do with it. And yet, he refused to speak. And yet, if he refused to speak, Kinza was lost, and all his efforts were wasted. Kinza had been so happy, so healthy, so safe. And now she would be sold to the beggar. Why else should his stepfather want her, and he would not be there to protect her? "I don't know anything about it," he said wearily after a long pause. But the nurse felt quite sure he knew a great deal about it. Though it might be difficult to worm it out of him, she must proceed very carefully. "Let's go home and have some supper tonight," she said soothingly. "We can talk about it in the house. You must be hungry after being in the mountains all day." And since he had had little to eat since that evening before, having not been to work, he was ravenously hungry. There was a gnawing pain inside of him, and unless he accepted the English nurse's offer, there was very little chance of food that night. It was rather risky to go to her house because, after all, it might be a trick. Oh, but he was so hungry. "Nobody can make me talk, he thought. So he slipped his dirty little hand into the hand of the English nurse, and she clasped it firmly and did not let go until they were safely inside her house with the door locked behind them. She led Haman upstairs to the room where he had once seen Kinza asleep. He sat down cross-legged on the mat, sniffing the delicious smell of hot rice and vegetables cooking in the pot on the stove. She brought him a steaming bowlful and a great hunk of bread, and then fetched her own. She did not question him while he ate, for he was completely absorbed in his food, but she watched him thoughtfully. He was so like Kinza in looks, the same dark, bright eyes, heart-faced shape, and determined mouth. She waited until the last drop of food was gone and the bowl wiped clean with a crust of bread, and then she spoke with a certainty that she did not feel. "Haman," she said firmly, "do you know who has stolen your little sister, Kinza? If you know, you must tell me, because I want to get her back again." The English nurse was very tired, very strained, and very afraid that her guest was wrong. Her voice, which had been quite firm, quivered a little as she finished speaking, and that quiver reassured Haman. This was no trick. This was an honest cry of a loving heart. "I think my stepfather got her," he replied. "I saw him watching her in the market yesterday, and he followed her right across the square, but I thought she was safe with you." The nurse was surprised by her success, but she did not show it. She went on speaking very quietly. "Where does your stepfather live?" Haman told her the name of the village. "Didn't he know she was with me?" "No." The nurse made another guess. "Why did you put her in my passage that night?" "My mother told me to." Why? My stepfather did not want Kinza. He was going to sell her to a beggar, and Kinza would have been very unhappy, so my mother sent her to you. And now? My stepfather will sell her to the beggar. He wants the money. The nurse shrugged. Kinza's prospects were far worse than she had imagined, and she must save her somehow. She went on quietly questioning, "How far is the village?" 2 days' journey on a horse, but my stepfather probably came by road on a market truck. That only takes 6 hours. And you, how did you come? Partly on a truck, mostly walking. And Kinza? On my back. The nurse marveled at his courage, and surely Haman, who had dared so much for Kinza's sake, would help her now. And if I went to your village and offered to pay your father more than the beggar, would he let me buy Kinza back? I don't know. He might. But how would you know the house? There are many parts of the village with hills between. You must come with me and show me. I can't. My stepfather would beat me dreadfully if I went home. You need not go home. You can point out the house from a distance. But everyone in the village knows me. They will tell my stepfather. We will arrive after sunset in Mr. and Mrs. Swift's car. No one will see you in the dark, and surely you will do this to save Kinza. Haman scratched his head doubtfully, battling with his fears. Haman, she pleaded, if you refuse, I won't be able to find her. The beggar will have her, and she will suffer and be cold and hungry in the streets of a big city, and all her life she'll be live in the dark. If she comes back to me, she will grow up happily, and I will teach her about the Lord Jesus and how he loves her. I've told you about him so often, Haman. Do you believe in him yet? He glanced up at her shyly, but his eyes were bright. I love the Lord Jesus very much, he replied simply. He has forgiven me for all I've done wrong and made my heart happy. And then he can also make your heart brave, she urged. Let's ask him now, Haman, to take away your fear and to save Kinza. He shut his eyes obediently, and as the nurse prayed, he repeated the words after her. While she was speaking, 2 thoughts came into his mind. If the Lord Jesus really loved him, he would not let his stepfather beat him, and so there was nothing to be afraid of. He also thought what fun it would be to drive all the way to his village in the Englishman's big, gray, fast car. Even while he prayed, the Spirit of God breathed happy, brave thoughts into this troubled heart. So when they had finished praying, he was quite ready to agree to the nurse's suggestion, and he finally left the house feeling very excited. As he wandered across the marketplace, he imagined himself sitting upright in the car window, waving proudly like a king to his friends. He suddenly laughed with delight and skipped in the air, and his stepfather would do anything for money, and the nurse would certainly offer more than the beggar would give. As soon as he left the house, Rosemary set out for the hotel to discuss her plan with Mr. and Mrs. Swift. They had taken Jenny up into the mountains for a picnic, but she had not wanted to go and had been in a bad mood all day. She found them sitting in the lounge, looking tired and depressed. Has anything happened? They asked, eagerly, jumping up as soon as they saw her. Yes, said Rosemary, unable to hide her excitement. She dropped into the empty chair and leaned forward. She poured out the wonderful story. Of course, I've gone and fixed it all up with Haman without consulting you, she ended, but I felt quite sure you'd be willing because you've been so concerned about Kinza. We would have to start tomorrow afternoon. It's about a 6-hour drive in order to arrive after sunset. Then Haman said it's a good walk on beyond where the car can go. We would not be back till after midnight, but I didn't think you'd mind that. Of course not, Mrs. Swift assured her, as eager as she was. John shall take you and Haman, and I'll stay with Jenny. I don't think she ought to go. There'll be no end of trouble if she's left behind, said her father, and the eagerness vanished from their faces, and they both sighed. Is Jenny in bed? Inquired Rosemary. Could I tell her about it, or will she be asleep? Mr. and Mrs. Swift glanced at each other, and there was a moment's silence, and then Mrs. Swift said, Yes, do go and tell her, she said. Rosemary, I wish you could somehow talk her into a better mood. She's so fond of you, and I don't seem to be able to do anything with her tonight. We've had such a miserable day because she didn't want to go to the picnic. She wanted to stay and help you look for Kinza. Of course, I know she's been ill and all that, but really she does behave like a spoiled baby when she can't get her own way. I sent her to bed when we got in, added Mr. Swift gloomily. Her tempers are just getting too much. She's not used to being punished, and it took it very badly, so I don't know what sort of mood you'll find her in. She'll certainly kick up an awful fuss if she's not allowed to go tomorrow." "Poor Jenny," said Rosemary. "I'll go and see if she's still awake." And she climbed the stairs rather slowly and knocked on the door. There was no answer. She opened the door and went in. "What do you want?" said the sullen voice under the bedclothes. "I haven't gone to sleep early like you said, so you needn't think I have." "It's me, Jenny," said Rosemary quietly, and went over and sat down on the bed. Jenny came out at once, rather embarrassed, for she always spoke politely in front of Aunt Rosemary, wanting to think she was a nice child. However, Mummy and Daddy had probably been talking about her, and she must make Aunt Rosemary see her point of view. Surely she would understand and see how ill-treated she was. "Oh, Auntie Rosemary," cried Jenny, bursting into tears. "I'm so glad you've come. I've been thinking about Kinza all day long." "Oh, no, you haven't," replied Rosemary in a very matter-of-fact voice. "You've been thinking about yourself all day long, and that's why you're so unhappy. Selfish people are always unhappy when they mind so much when they can't have their own way." "I'm not selfish," sobbed Jenny angrily. "You don't know any more than Mummy and Daddy do. I couldn't stop wondering where Kinza was, and they took me away where I couldn't find out or hear if there was any news." "But your hearing the news wouldn't have helped Kinza at all," replied Rosemary. "It would have just satisfied your own curiosity. And because you couldn't be satisfied, you made Mummy and Daddy miserable all day long. And if that's not selfish, I don't know what is." Jenny could not think of nothing to say, so she just repeated, "You don't understand." "Oh, Jenny, Jenny, I understand so well," cried Aunt Rosemary, suddenly kneeling down and drawing the angry, hot little girl towards her. "I understand that because you have always had everything you want, because Mummy and Daddy have always given you such lovely things and have been so good to you, you think nothing matters in the world except your own happiness. Your heart is like a little closed-in circle with yourself in the middle, and everything happens that hurts you or annoys you, you think the world is coming to an end. As you grow older, Jenny, you will find that there are more and more things that will annoy you and hurt you, and you're going to grow into a very unhappy, unloving person. You see, you haven't really time or room to love anyone else properly because you're too busy loving yourself." Jenny was quite silent. No one had ever talked to her like this before. Her mother and father usually ended by saying, "Never mind, darling, we're sure you didn't mean it. Let's forget all about it." But perhaps Auntie Rosemary was partly speaking the truth. She often did feel very, very unhappy simply because it was not always possible for her to have her own way. She thought of a girl at school who had wanted to learn to ride a horse and who wanted a new dress for a party, but she couldn't have either because her father couldn't afford it. Yet she had not made a fuss about it and had seemed to really enjoy the party, even though she was wearing one of her sister's old dresses. Jenny could not understand it. "I can't help minding things," said Jenny at last in a small, hurt voice, "and I do love people. I love Mummy and Daddy and you and Kinza and lots of people." "Only as long as we please you," replied Rosemary, "and as soon as we stop doing what you want, you are quite happy to make us miserable, as you made Mummy and Daddy miserable today." Jenny was silent again. It was no good trying to make Auntie Rosemary understand her, because apparently she knew all about her, but it made her feel peaceful in a strange sort of way. Jenny suddenly felt she could stop pretending. "I don't want to be good. I do want to be good and happy," she whispered, "and I do want to make Mummy happy, but I can't. I just seem to mind things so much that I can't help being cross." "Yes," agreed Rosemary thoughtfully, "I know. The only way you can change is to ask Jesus into your heart, and he will come into the circle and change you. At first you will still want to have your own way, but the more you love him, the less you will love yourself first. You will want what he wants, and gradually you will become happier and happier and feel more satisfied. It sounds difficult, but it's really quite simple." "Oh, I see," said Jenny rather sleepily. She had stopped crying and was lying very still. Rosemary waited a moment and then said, "I really want to tell you some news about Kinza." We've discovered where she's gone, and tomorrow your father and Ahmad and I are going to her home, and we're going to try to persuade her stepfather to let us have her back." "Oh, where? When? How?" cried Jenny, springing up from the bed. "Tell me all about it. Quickly. Can I come too?" "No," said Rosemary, "you can't. Mummy says we will get back too late, and probably the fewer of us who go, the better. You've got a chance to make up for today by obeying without being cross and sulky. Now I'll tell you how I found out and all about it." As she told her, Jenny lay and listened quietly. It was all going to come about right after all, perhaps, and she did not deserve it. Last night she had said a sort of promise. "If Kinza comes back, I'm going to be good forever and ever." "Auntie," she whispered, her face half burrowed in the pillow, "tell Mummy to come. I want to tell her I'm sorry and that I'll be good tomorrow." And tomorrow we'll read chapter 17, An Exciting Night. I love you, I'm praying for you, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.